What's cracking, everybody? Welcome to the Weekend Outdoorsman podcast. If you're a returner, thanks for coming back, and we really appreciate your support. If you're new to the podcast, thanks for tuning in, and we hope you stick around for many, many more podcasts. Today, we're going to bring on board a special guest. If you've ever heard of Phelps game calls, then you've probably heard of Jason Phelps. For those of you that don't know Jason, he is the owner of Phelps game calls. And if you want to check out more, kind of see more about Phelps game calls and what they're all about, head over to Instagram and check out their page. It's just Phelps game calls. But we're bringing Jason on board today because we're going to pick his brain on his elk knowledge and try to learn some more there. But we really want to learn from him how he started his business, where the game call business came about. And we just want to really learn from him and get to know Jason. And so we think we got a special one for you guys today. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope y'all enjoy. Welcome to the Weekend Outdoorsman podcast, where our mission is to keep traditions alive, fueled by a passion for the outdoors. Whether you're a bow hunter, fisherman, or just love the outdoors, then this is the podcast for you. Our aim is to help inspire you to keep any traditions you may have alive, as well as create new ones. Any moment can be a learning experience, so we hope that you'll learn as much as we will through the guests we bring on here. Hopefully we can bring you the right information that can help you seal the deal on that big bull, buck, or whatever game you're chasing. So sit back in traffic, the office, or on the way to a hunt and enjoy. Well, Jason, we'll go ahead and we'll get this thing rolling, but we like to start off our podcast with a little quick icebreaker that we call thin ice. You ready for it?
Sure.
All right. Well, we're going to ask just 5 quick questions for you real quick. So the first one I'm gonna throw at you real quick is going to be Onyx or Base Map?
Base Map. I've used both. They're both good programs. Just the better image quality right now on Base Map seems to help us out a little bit.
Next one we'll throw at you. Bow or rifle?
Are we talking elk?
Yes, definitely elk. Yeah. Well, we're going to center this whole entire podcast on elk.
Yep. If it's elk, then definitely a bow. There's nothing like chasing them in the rut with a bow.
I think we're right there with you on that one.
So favorite celebrity that you'd want to go hunting on the mountain with?
Favorite celebrity? I got 2 answers. Nate Simmons. I've always kind of, he's always been able to get it done, been super humble in the way that he does it. And then, just a guy I'd like to learn from. And then probably Ranella, just because he's such a wealth of information, just to, listen to the guy talk and his knowledge that, may not be all hunting knowledge, but just knowledge about everything that we, do as hunters would be cool. So those 2 guys. I did get to hunt with Ryan Lampers, who was one of my buddies, just to kind of see, like, why is this guy so good? So I think the 2 guys left, Nate Simmons and Ranella.
That's one thing I've always noticed about Ranella myself, like watching the show, just listening to the podcast. It just whenever you hear him read his stuff, there's always facts that you're like, how do you even know that kind of stuff?
Yeah. No, I'm right there. Like, I feel like I know a lot about elk and their history and everything. And then you talk to a guy like that, and he just knows so much more than even I do. And it's like that on every subject I've been able to talk with him about on hunting. And the guy's just like a steel trap, remembers it all.
All right, so this one's going to be a little bit more off the wall, little curveball for you. Breakfast, lunch, or different people call it dinner, different things, dinner or supper. Favorite meal. Breakfast. And which one? And what is breakfast. Your favorite meal?
Okay, I'm going to go big sausage patty with over easy eggs on top of hash browns and some white toast or English muffin. Just the old standard breakfast, but you can't beat that. You can eat that for every meal of the day and still be fine.
I like your style, sir. All right, last one for the thin ice, and then we'll move on with the rest of it. Your favorite hunting or just outdoors in general memory?
It just happens to be, and I would actually try not to pick the biggest animal that I've killed, but it ironically comes back to that biggest elk that I killed in 2012. And the reason why, a lot of what I did since I've realized that there's a lot of hunting outside of my local town is I haven't got to hunt with my dads and uncles, the guys that taught me to hunt as much. And in 2012, I was able to kill my biggest bull ever, and they were able to come up on the mountain with me, help pack it out and break it down when I hadn't been able to hunt with them a whole lot. So I was able to kill it close enough to home. And so just for the fact that they got to be a part of it and be with me on that hunt makes that a pretty special moment. During all the hunts that I've been on, the animal itself made it pretty special, but then to have them all included, it made it a little more special.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we can both relate to that one. That's kind of what we kind of center all of this around, is just, the traditions that we've had, growing up hunting and just getting to spend the time outdoors. And like last year was our first time to get to go elk hunting, and we got to go with our dad. It was something that, we've had for 15 plus years in the making. And last year we finally decided to get out there and do it, and it was well worth it. It's something that we'll carry with us forever.
Yeah, that's how I always keep myself in check, is the hunting industry. I call it an industry, or, hunting, that I kind of got thrown into the industry through the game call side of it. But like the one question that always keeps me in check, and it's kind of goofy one, but like, what would Grandpa think? The guy that grew up hunting in his plaid jacket and his logging jeans and his logging boots with his Stanley thermos every morning. Like, what would that guy think of what I'm doing right now? And it's a good like grounding check, I guess, just to make sure that I'm still looking at through the looking at hunting through the right lens.
I like that. I think if everybody looked at it that way, it would give people a lot of really good perspective on what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I think if you're good, if you're ready, we've gotten through thin ice. We'll go ahead and move into the meat of the podcast if you're good with that.
Okay. Yeah, we're ready.
All right. So I guess first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of a high level 30,000 foot view, we like to call it. Just some information about yourself and how you got started in hunting and with all of this.
Yeah. So, Jason Phelps, I lived in, grew up and still live in Southwest Washington. It's mainly a logging town here. It's a small town called Peel, Washington. Married, have 2 kids. They all love to hunt. Matter of fact, just got back from a Colorado deer hunt with my wife, and just kind of grew up here. Growing up, I wouldn't let my kids go fishing now, but at the age of my oldest son, like I was riding my bike up in the creeks or to a pond or to a lake to fish. And I can remember, going out with Grandpa and Grandma, just deer hunting, driving the roads. And, being 7 years old, no hunting license, no safety certificate, but Grandpa saying, hey, do you want to shoot this deer? And, me not being able to get on the deer and all of that. And it's just, I almost feel like it wasn't a choice, even though I'm sure if I ever didn't want to do it, it would have been an option. But it was just kind of something we did from the time I, was a little teeny kid, going deer scouting on the weekend and looking for deer. And it was just kind of what we did living here in PL. You ride your 4-wheelers out your garage and you go up in the woods and, go grouse hunting, or, ride your 4-wheeler up to a river or a lake or a fishing hole. So it was pretty easy to get involved. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the town I live in is mainly a logging community. Weyerhaeuser, which is the largest landowner in the state, has one of their big logging camps here. And so all of my family, for the most part, was loggers of some sort. So they spend all of their time out in the woods. And it just made sense. And then when I was 25, a guy that thought he was a good elk caller, a guy that took a lot of passion in elk calling, I was really just frustrated with what was out there at the time, the quality of what was out there, and always kind of been a tinkerer. I've got that engineering brain and then a little bit of an entrepreneurial side, and just started tinkering with elk calls and trying to make them more consistent and better. And that kind of leads us to today. I won't bore everybody with the details in between now and then. A lot of hard work, a lot of late nights, a lot of being a nerd behind the computer and designing new stuff. But it ultimately led, to what I'd like to consider the success of Phelps game calls now is just my passion to make the best elk calls, the easiest to use elk calls that we can.
You know, that kind of hits home for me, talking about riding the back roads with your grandparents and everyone else. It's kind of a faint memory now as I've gotten older, but I remember our dad and our grandfather, they just had a small piece of land. It was like 10-15 acres. And I always stayed with my grandparents growing up. And I specifically remember when I was a little kid, we went and I got a little fold together set of binoculars with like these little plastic quote unquote lenses that you stuck into the ends of these binoculars once you got the cardboard folded right. And I couldn't tell you exactly how old I was, but I remember getting them all set up, and then going the out to the acreage with my grandparents in the back of Grandpa's Chrysler Fifth Avenue to go and look at the deer and see what was running around out there.
That's awesome. Yeah, to this day, Alabama can't come on the radio without me going like right back to riding in the old Chevy white square body, looking for deer with Grandma and Grandpa. So it's pretty cool to have that memory kind of stuck there, and at least get to do it for a bit.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of cool just hearing somebody else have a similar experience, similar memory.
Where'd you learn how to call, Jason?
It was really just from scouting. I'll take you in a circle here. I was always out in the woods, whether it was July, August, September, and I grew up primarily a muzzleloader / rifle elk hunter. We grew up here. We had all 3 seasons growing up in Washington, and my family was predominantly rifle hunters, even though a few guys would break off in muzzleloader here or there. And scouting in August, I was like, man, there's so many more elk out. There's always a bull with the herd. There's this or that. And I remember I bought a Primos Terminator tube, the infamous blue cap tube, and it got fairly good. And this was in my high school, my high school age. And on one of those August scouting trips, the end of August, I had called in over a weekend, 4 or 5 different bulls, with no intent to hunt. I still had a rifle tag. I was just calling elk in, no bow. And I'm like, man, this is easy. It just happened to be that easy because I didn't have a bow, I'm sure. But like, this is easy. If I would have had a bow, I could have killed all these elk. So that Christmas, I can remember asking, my parents, no idea about anything to do with bow hunting. You get the old Cabela's catalog, and there was a PSE of some sort on the cover, and like, Mom and Dad, I want that bow for Christmas. And
Yep.
They ended up getting it, and that was just kind of my entry to bow hunting. I spent that whole entire year getting ready, learning to shoot, kind of became obsessed with, shooting targets and going to the indoor brush shoots and stuff that we had here, and got pretty, efficient. And then went out in that first year I called in a whole bunch of bulls, but wasn't able to really kind of settle my nerves. And so I don't even like throwing this number out here, but I missed a whole lot of bulls that year. I didn't tag anything in the early season during the rut. I ended up killing a bull later that year in like our late season, when you're basically just spot and stalking. But that kind of set the fire to learning to call. So from that moment on, I kind of took a bunch of pride. And back then there was really just the Primos Truth series and a few CDs that they were putting out, or I guess it was tapes at that time. I just spent a lot of time trying to mimic real elk, mimic what they were doing, trying to learn how to make all the different sounds. And really just kind of, picked it up. And I have kind of this obsessive compulsive thing with everything I do, whether it was sports growing up or, the business, and it's made me fairly successful. But if I take something on, I've got that mentality that I don't want to quit until I'm the best at it. And so it was the same thing with elk calling. Like, yeah, you were pretty good. You were good enough to call something in, but I don't want the next guy to be better than me, or I don't want, anybody to be better than me, or even the elk to be better than me, or whatever it may be. So I just spent a ton of time practicing and making sure I was as good as possible. And I'm not going to lie, even when I started the game call company, I still became a lot better caller since then, just because there's so much more time and repetition involved, testing calls and doing all that. It makes me super comfortable with the calls, and there's never a moment in my life where I'm not blowing on a call, every couple of days at the shop or new prototypes. But I'm confident that I couldn't touch an elk call for like a year, and it'd be just like riding a bike. I could put it back in just because it's so ingrained now on what I do and what I need to do to sound right.
So when you were learning to call, like, were you learning on what you make now? Like, were you learning on reeds and diaphragms and like using tubes? I know you brought up that primos tubes. Um, were you like, was that stuff out there when you were learning? Is that what you were learning on
Yeah.
and decide to make it better, or?
Yeah, so the blue primos, like that first year, I was just using the blue cap, and it worked. And I'm a pretty honest guy. Like I would still bet to this day that more elk have been called in with the blue primos than any of my calls, combined. It's a reality. It's what people are comfortable with, or what they use. But I learned really quick that I could take that mouthpiece off and just use a diaphragm through that tube. So I quickly, graduated to, let's get rid of the blue snap-on reed and let's go to just using the diaphragm through that tube. And that's what I believe is kind of that next level calling, is when you can manipulate a diaphragm, through a tube, or a diaphragm for cow calls, and can get all of those different sounds out. Like that's kind of when you're kind of like, you're getting to the point where you're good at that point. And there's not very many times out in the woods where an elk makes any sort of sound and I don't feel like I can somehow duplicate or copy that. There are a few guttural bull sounds that there's just like, yep, I'm going to tap out because I can't figure out how to make that, or I just physically can't make that sound. But 95% of the sounds, like, I've spent so much time with the calls that I can eventually figure out, how to make that work. But yeah, the easy estresses, the external type cow calls, we spent a lot of time on those. Just I wanted to be good on those. I didn't want to screw them up when the time came to use those. But I would say the majority of my time was spent on the diaphragm, learning how to run that right.
I definitely understand that. Like we both grew up, we did a fair bit of turkey hunting growing up, and we were lucky. I feel like it kind of maybe gives us, I'm not gonna say an edge, but a little bit of familiarity with the diaphragm. Our dad, he used diaphragm calls turkey calling, and so we kind of had that introduction to it, and there's a little bit of
Yep.
familiarity to it. I won't even begin to say that I trying to figure out all the different calls and uh the different types of bugles and all that stuff. That's still a work in progress, but I personally, and Will's probably a little bit better at it than I am, um but I can get a decent cow call out of a diaphragm. I can um kind of muster up a bugle without gagging too bad with the diaphragm in my mouth. So
Yeah.
it's kind of funny that reed, man, that's what's been giving me fits, is getting that dialed in.
Yeah. It got to the point where I worked out in the woods, doing fish passage, culverts, and bridge designs and stuff. So I was always out in the woods, and I just had those dang calls in my mouth like 12 hours a day, driving to and from work, trying to figure out how to make like the perfect lip ball. And then, I would identify something I didn't think was good, whether it was like a cow buzz, these sounds that you really don't even need to hunt with, but as I had mentioned, I'm being obsessive compulsive. Like I wanted to be able to make that sound as perfect as possible. So I'd spend, and most people probably go nuts, but I would spend 12 hours a day trying to make a specific, estrus buzz sound, and drive myself absolutely nuts until I got it right. And so that was just kind of my mentality going in. Is I had nothing better to do besides drive. Let's try to, figure this out and make it perfect. But like I say, for hunting and being successful, it's probably way over the top. As long as you can make a good location bugle, a good challenge bugle, and a good cow call, that's probably all you need to be successful.
Man, I wish you could see some of the looks I've gotten. I've got a pretty good commute going to and from work right now. It's not quite an hour each way, and just the looks that I'll get driving, with a bugle tube driving down the highway. uh, it can be pretty entertaining at times.
Yeah. Yeah, bugle tubes are loud inside the cab of the truck, though. I would usually reserve that for off the front porch or something at home. But yeah, all types of cow calls and all of that. But yeah, the bugle tubes definitely inside the rig doing it too much.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I tried the bugle tube outside at home a couple of times and got some interesting looks from my neighbors as well. So the truck seems to be the safest place for me to do that right now.
There you go. Yeah. I live in a podunk America when I can bugle off my front porch and somebody across town answers me occasionally.
Oh man, that'd be awesome. I would love that. It's my neighbors aren't quite of the same mentality I am, so I'm not gonna say they frown upon it, but they definitely wonder what I'm doing every now and then.
Perfect.
Were you when you were learning to call, did you have somebody that you would like consider a mentor that was, helping you along the way with it, or was it mostly self-taught?
I did, and it was really self-taught. Back when I started, it was kind of before the internet era. It hadn't really taken off. There wasn't all of the the resources that are out there now. And so it was really just those primos tapes, watching their hunts, trying to mimic what the real elk were doing on the videos, and then, trying to mimic what they were doing. And then there was a lot of trial and error. Just fortunately for me, back when I started archery hunting in the area that I'm in, nobody really archery elk hunted. And so there were multiple mornings where I could get on 5 or 6 different bulls in a single morning and screw them up, or, whatever it may be. And so I just got a lot of repetition here where nobody else was archery elk hunting, and kind of had them all to ourselves. So we did a lot of practice in real world. And then, like I said, I used to hunt and be out in the woods all the time. I would spend the entire time between archery and muzzleloader season for that 2 weeks, and just trying to call bulls in, see how they react. So I was working on not only strategy and kind of developing what I consider what I actually do strategy wise, but then also, my calling techniques and what I sound like.
Yeah, I wish that's a bad part about Texas. I mean, there's a lot of great things about this state, but if you want to practice any kind of calling on elk or anything like that, it's going to be on private land, and so it can be kind of hard to get access. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of try and cram as much in learning before we go, and then see what kind of reactions we get once we're there.
Yeah. And that's where I was super fortunate. Just at the time I grew up, to have the amount of elk that were in this area was crazy. And then the opportunities that I had to call the elk was, probably unprecedented. Maybe never ever, there's no other place you could call to that many elk with no seasons running, maybe anywhere else.
How do you learn to build calls? Like where did you learn to build your calls? Like did you have a baseline that you were working from, or was it all from scratch? Like what's this, now that we've actually gotten to talk to you, this is something I've been dying to ask you. Like how do you actually build these calls?
So I'll take you down 2 different parallel paths, and part of it was I didn't want to, and I don't know what the right word is, I didn't want to kind of neglect the old school way of building and designing calls. So there's the old school way where these guys would take raw plastic, raw wood, get out their tools, whether it was a saw, whether it was a jigsaw, whether it was a router, whether it was a hand file. And the old school call makers would build these things by hand. They would file, they would build their radiuses, their curves, and they would build these things by hand from start to finish. And so I did that as well. I wanted to know what they went through, what was involved, what mattered. Like if you steepen their curve up on a tone board, if you flatten the tone board, if you pitch it in, if you pitch it out, what, the comfort of why do these reeds stick sometimes while you're using them. I wanted to understand all of that. And I did. And so that I'm talking more about the externals, where I kind of started before I got into the diaphragm side. And then the other side, as I mentioned earlier, I've got an engineering degree.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very capable when I sit down at a computer to draft up any part that my mind can think of. So, all right, on the one side, I've sat there and spent time with the file. So now I know what a flat tone board does versus a steep tone board, the different vibrations we get. So now when I go to my computer, I'm pretty educated. I've got a good understanding. I'm a very now that I'm 37, but when I started, I was only 25 years old doing this, and not that other call makers aren't as young as I was, but there's a gray hair effect, I think, in the call making world, where a lot of these older or the call companies were all owned by older guys. I had the ability to sit down at my computer, send that design over to my 3D printer that sits 2 feet away from me, and within 2 hours have a working part. And I could say, well, this is garbage. I'm going to throw it away, and I'm going to make this change and have a new part in 2 hours. And so I had a very, very accelerated learning curve into design. Everything that we make is very, very expensive tool-wise. To get a diaphragm frame, you're somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000-$50,000 in tooling for these progressive dies. And so a guy like myself, especially when I was starting, I didn't have that kind of money to throw away or screw up on a design. So it was nice to say, I'm going to send this to a 3D printer. I'm going to be able to test this in real world, and then know with fairly good certainty that part's going to work when I send it off to have it mass produced. And so that was kind of my entry to the external cow calls. Diaphragms, reverse engineering or looking at them and saying, well, this is a aluminum frame or a plastic frame with some latex stretch between it and tape. At that time, there were starting to be some forums. I had a very, very good mentor in the hunting world, a very, very good turkey caller, Chris Parrish, who was able to help me a little bit and give me some direction on material supplies. Bought some calls from him, and kind of just got some input that way. But the building and designing, I always wanted to come back to, let's make these things sound as good as possible and easy to use for the end user. But the one thing a lot of people don't think of, or they shouldn't have to think of, which I did, is if I've got 5 or 6 different people building these diaphragms so that we can keep up with demand, how do I make it very, very easy on them to not only, one, produce a very consistent call, but then make all of the, they can build a consistent call, but then make all of the parameters or all of the checkboxes not as crucial, if that makes any sense. So, you're stretching this latex, your first stretch matters, your second stretch matters, your back stretch matters, all this stuff matters, but let's make a design that's very, very conservative, or that can handle some inconsistencies and still sound very, very good. So the end user, even if my builders aren't building it exactly every single time, the end user really can't tell the difference because we built such some generous specs into that call. And so that's why when we look at how many times and how long I sat here to designing our amp diaphragm frame, why it took 17 different revisions until I was finally happy with what we had. So a lot of it is, let's design that good, easy to use call, but then let's make sure that we can build that thing consistently over and over and over, which is, was my biggest, was at the top of my priorities when I set out to design these things. But it's just, it was a lot of time. Like, I'm not going to lie. I got my first diaphragm press, and I bet you my first 1,000 calls that I built were throwaways. Super frustrated. And then slowly it starts to catch on, well, I did this 5 times in a row and this works. And I did this again and it works a little bit better. And I slowly started to dial in to what matters. And then, one of my other lead builders, Charlie, he was kind of along for the beginning of that ride, and he added some good input. We just kind of figured it all out together. It's crazy that it took us 10 years of building diaphragms to get to kind of our knowledge base now. And we can pass all that information on to somebody else in 2 hours and let them, be as good a builder as we can within a couple of weeks. But no, it was just our dedication to, I want to be the, if any call company can do it, let's build the most consistent calls in the world and make them easy to use.
So was there a lot of, I don't know if you want to call it reverse engineering, where, there's kind of the concept of a diaphragm call. Do you then, was it something where you look at it and say, okay, I've got this concept, now reverse engineer it, kind of break it down back to the basics, and then build it back up into what you wanted it to be? Or, was it just kind of, let's start from scratch?
It was more of a, a scratch, and the reason why is that, and I don't even know if some of the call builders on their own designs know why stuff works, if that makes any sense. So I really needed to figure out for myself as an engineer, as a guy that wants to know why things work and why they don't. I started from scratch because I wanted to know, well, if I bend the plate, what's that do? If I make a flat plate, what's that do? If I put a kink, if I put a V in the plate, what's that do? And so, if I push the latex forward, if I push it back. So I really just kind of spent a ton of time, building different calls, and then also, as I mentioned, going through different revisions and then testing it all again. So now, I would say maybe more so than anybody else, I understand exactly what's going on that diaphragm, what the piece of latex, what the thickness of latex matters, what the stretch in the latex matters, how you incorporate that with the frame design and how it's going to affect it. And so it really was, I don't want to say I reverse engineered it aside from, well, I know there's aluminum frame, I know there's some latex, I know there's some tape. We really started with the design from the ground up and really just refined everything that I was able to learn and put it into this final product that we now call the AMP diaphragm frame.
That's awesome. I've got a little bit of engineering learning myself. Not to the extent that you did, but it was in my time in school. It was, I took a fair amount of engineering courses, and it's just always something that's, I kind of have that same curiosity, why does something work? What makes it work? So, getting to hear you kind of talk through some of that stuff, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, it's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, it's pretty nerdy. Like my wife wouldn't want to listen to me explain all that because she just doesn't care, but definitely kind of a nerd on that. And then it's cool to figure it out. And I'm not like I'm not an audio engineer. I don't really understand, sound, but I was able to kind of proof and kind of use some of my engineering background just to kind of say, well, let's just put together this idea and then just, give check marks to what's working and throw away what isn't. And then we're able to use all those check marks to ultimately come up with a good design.
So what somebody goes on your website and, they go to the diaphragm page. What are some of the things without, I mean, I'm sure we could spend hours and hours and hours talking about this, but what are some of the things that differentiate one call from another? Like out there right now, people following you, people following Dirk, what are some of the differentiating factors between for example, the Maverick and the pink call? What makes a Maverick and a pink signature a signature?
Okay, so there's three factors. All those calls use the same frame. So when we say an AMP black or a Maverick or a Phelps pink, they're all built on the AMP frame. So we kind of got to throw that out as any differentiation between those because they're all the same exact frame, same width. What we're left with are three factors that will affect how this call operates. Number one is the thickness of the latex. It's obvious that a thicker latex is going to have a deeper sound. It's going to vibrate at a lower frequency. So that's kind of number one. Number two is how we stretch the call, both side to side and back tension stretch. So that's another factor that we can play with and manipulate on the call. And number three, which took me a long time to figure out, is that the color of the latex changes its properties, whether it's, my call uses natural latex, so it's got kind of a white, almost see-through color. Dirk's Maverick has a green. We found out that the green holds a little bit less moisture and reacts a little bit quicker. So some of the colored pigments, the darker colors like green and black, are more of what we call a quote unquote rubberish type. They've got more of a rubber feel to them versus like a latex stretch, if that makes any sense. So we've got these three factors: thickness of latex, how we stretch the latex, and then the color. And those three things combined, we can come up with all these different formulas and ultimately build a million different calls based on color, stretch, and thickness. We kind of got to figure out how those three things interact together to make a good ELK call. And that's really kind of what, the science is behind the ELK call design and building. Once we've got the frame, is all right, we're going to use a piece of 4 thousandths natural latex on the pink Phelps. Where does it need to be stretched? How does it need to be stretched to make an elk, call? And then that's where some guys aren't going to like certain calls and some guys are going to like the others, because some guys might want a slower reacting call like the pink or the natural, or they may want a quicker reacting call like the Maverick, or a purple latex call. Like the purple, blues, and greens, they tend to react very fast. They stretch back quicker. They're a little bit quicker of a call, where our darker, like our black, some of the yellows, some of the naturals tend to be a little bit slower. So it's really, trying to figure out those recipes on what makes a good elk call. Now, with that said, to your specific question, the green latex that we use in the Maverick is a little bit thicker. We stretch it a little bit tighter than like the pink Phelps. So we've got natural, a little bit thinner latex, a little bit less stretch. On the pink, on the Maverick, we have thicker latex, a little bit tighter stretch in green latex. So that's really kind of what our job is behind, as a designer, is just trying to figure out the right recipe for all those different thicknesses and colors.
Man, so I could see the thickness, I could see the stretch, the color of the latex, that came out of left field for me. I never would have thought that was something that would actually affect the call itself. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and like I said, engineering nerd, people laugh at me or tell me I'm crazy, but there was a day where me and Charlie had took every single color and thickness of latex we had, and we built it in like 5-10,000 increments of stretch and laid them all out on this, on the table. And basically, you can start to see like I guess kind of a trend line as you get thicker and different colors, and you're like, well, this is kind of where these calls need to live, and that's kind of where we developed the original classic off of the orange to the white, and then we added the signatures later. But there's only a certain amount that are going to work with different colors, and it kind of, that was kind of the day the light bulb came on, is like, well, this is how you're going to have to design calls, based on color and thickness. That's
pretty cool. Like I said, I never would have thought that, but knowing it now, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of calls out there in the industry, a lot of companies. What would you say separates the Phelps calls from the rest of the industry?
I hate answering these questions because I don't want to say, I hate saying that we're better or we do things better. So I'm going to kind of give my employees and my builders kind of the nod here. I feel that our builders take a lot of pride in what they do. They're all diehard elk hunters, all very, very good callers, all super passionate about elk calling. And I pay my call builders very, very well, to the point where there's no need for them to rush or to have to work, above what they're comfortable working at in order to make money. We do piecework, so as long as they're building, a call, they're making money. And it's really, as much as I'd like to take credit, I did give them a very good design to build off of. But between our 5 or 6 diaphragm builders, everything's done by hand. Very passionate people when it comes to elk calling. So they know that the person they're building that call for, how much they want out of that call. And then it's really just their comfortability with building. I tell all of my builders, if you screw up on a piece of tape, throw that call in the garbage, and if you need to be paid for it, write it down and I'll pay you for it. Like, I don't want you to feel like you're losing money because you screw up on a couple calls, and don't include it, because I will pay you for throwing that thing in the garbage, just because I would rather have it there than live in our lineup. And so that's on the diaphragm side. One of the reasons I think our consistency is so good. Another thing is just my attention to detail. When, say, our latex shipment comes in and we have 250,000 pieces of latex sitting in front of us, it'd be very easy for me to just count it and throw it on the rack. But I'm the guy that gets out my calipers and says, this is a little bit thick, this is a little bit thin. And I will write a note for all my builders like, hey, we might need to modify the stretch just a little bit to get this to sound like all the other pink Phelpses we've ever built. Or, hey, we might need to do this or that. Having that understanding on what the thickness does and everything lets me design or redesign or make a small change to a call so that the end user doesn't know that the call they just bought is slightly different than the call they bought 5 years ago, but to them it sounds exactly the same. And that's really the key to consistency. Like my goal is for the, you know, the ELK caller that buys a black amp off the shelf this year has the same exact call that they feel they bought 5 years ago off the shelf. And that consistency is very, very important. So that's kind of my long answer to why I would say our stuff's a little bit better. It's just the attention to detail. I'm very detail oriented. So even on our custom, not our custom, our external cow calls, like the process of this is what we do first, this is what we do second, this is what we do third, this is what you check before it goes in the bag. And if all those things aren't met, set the call aside and let me look at it. And if I can't ensure that it's going to sound good, that's also going to go in the garbage. It's just kind of our commitment to making sure that all these calls go out the door and they're right.
Pretty cool to hear.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I don't want to tell everybody how much we have in a diaphragm, but for not a whole lot of money, it's just easier for me to lose that in the garbage can than it is to risk, you know, turning it out to a customer that may or may not. And that's the other thing. Like, you could be a bad business guy. There's a lot of times where I'm like, well, 90% of the callers out there aren't as good as me. They may not ever tell anyways, but just having that mindset that thinking that everybody maybe is as good a caller as me and Dirk, and they're going to tell, I don't want to take that risk, and I never would anyway, so let's just throw that in the garbage and build the call right.
One of the things I kind of want to branch off of, you know, you talked a little bit about how you've got your engineering background, and we've talked about some of the different calls, but I was kind of wanting to know if maybe you could give us a little bit more insight about, or a little bit of a background story about how Phelps was started, like more depth of detail and like kind of what you've done to get it where it is today.
I've always had that entrepreneurial background, or I don't say background, just that spark. Like, I've always wanted to do something. I've been very successful as a professional engineer here in the state of Washington. You know, design bridges, design fish passage culverts, design, you know, Interstate 5 sections between Portland and Seattle. Like, very successful as a professional engineer, but it was very boring. And I felt like it was, not that I'm a super smart guy, but it was kind of a waste of my what I was capable of. So my first, and I'm going to take a little side note or sidetrack here. Before I started doing the ELK calls, I was building high performance four-wheeler and motorcycle motors. I loved everything about making power and the noise and everything. So just like an engineer in the obsessive compulsive, I took things to a whole nother level, got flow benches, was figuring out how to port and polish heads on these motors to make them the absolute fastest that I could. You know, designing head pipes and exhaust systems, and, you know, doing all of this stuff. And that was fun, but my true passion was always hunting, and so I ultimately came back to that. My boy was born. My firstborn was in 2009, and after, you know, kind of the new baby phase wore off, I'm like, man, I'm kind of bored again. I'm not building four-wheeler motors. I'm just kind of sitting here. We're kind of in the phase where the kid's old enough now where, you know, he doesn't need as much attention, you know, and I just needed something, and was walking through a local sportsman show, and there was a local guy selling game calls, and they sounded bad, really, really bad. You know, just a local guy basically buying, you know, kits and putting them together. And like, this kind of gave me, like, this guy's all he's doing center wood. Like, I'm a redneck that took wood shop. Like, I can turn stuff on a lathe. I can figure this out. And so it just kind of started from that little spark, and me just wanting to have something to do. So I got a lathe, kind of did a bunch of research on the internet, figuring out how to make these parts, how people are hand filing. You know, I had enough calls around to kind of figure out approximately what the radiuses need to be, and then just started, you know, playing around and started doing that. As far as the business side, kind of where I think you were wanting this question to go, I was not a good quote unquote business guy, but I was a very good people person. Like, I will take care of everybody. I've got the ability to, like, have empathy for all of my customers or anybody that's in, you know, having a bad experience with us. And so I was able to kind of use my people skills and, you know, be empathetic when I was running the business and kind of really cater to what I think people needed. And then in my normal life, I'm very, very self-conscious. Like I don't want to be told no. I don't want to fail. But there's, you always hear the term keyboard warriors, and this isn't the same thing, but I wasn't near as bashful if I was able to send an email, because I figured somebody telling me no in an email, or that's not going to work, or we don't want to deal with you, was way different than if somebody told me that to my face. So I kind of got this courage behind the computer screen. And timing was good. Like social media came on strong at the time I started my business, and I was kind of that first game call company to kind of take to social media and really kind of push it home. So number one, I never went away from good designs. Like I felt like no matter how good of a marketer I was, no matter how good of a designer I was, like the calls had to work and people had to want to use them before I ever marketed them, before I ever reached out to people. So that was kind of number one. And number two was just my ability to reach out to people and kind of find the right, and I hate this word, but the right influencers or the right people to try them and spread the word about my calls. And I'd like to think I did the influencing thing right, that I didn't pick people that weren't good elk callers, or I didn't pick people just because they had 100,000 followers. Like I just went to people that were good elk callers or good elk hunters and said, hey, are you willing to use these calls? Are you willing to, do a giveaway on your forums? Are you willing to do a giveaway on your page? And it was really just, that was my tactic. I had nothing. I didn't have a giant marketing budget like Primos. I didn't have the ability to say, I'm going to flood every single magazine. I'm going to flood every single sportsman show. I'm going to go to all the ATA shows, whatever it may be, and sell the heck out of these calls. I had to sit behind my computer and basically figure out through social media with very, very low cost, how am I going to compete against some of these bigger companies to get my calls out there? And I honestly feel it was just that personal side that I was able to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, are you willing to give my calls a try? That kind of gave us that edge as we kind of made our way through this industry that I knew nothing about. I was a absolute nobody, and I still think I am a nobody. I'm just a guy that loves to hunt. But back when I started this, 11 years ago now, nobody knew who Jason Phelps was. It wasn't like I had a dad that was a famous hunter or a buddy that was already in the hunting industry. It was really just kind of, I'm coming in blind. Made some very, very good friends. There's some guys, Aaron Snyder, one of the owners of Cafaro now, that I became buddies with. We were kind of coming up at the same time. We always would throw ideas off of each other, like, hey, what are you doing? What shows are you going to? How are you doing this? Where are you finding money, in the industry? And we just kind of shared ideas, but it was tough. Like, I think if I was afraid to hear the word no, I would have never made it, because I literally just asked people that I looked up to, respected, like, will you use my calls even though you may be using somebody else's, or what it may be. And it was really just a grind. I can remember sitting on Facebook, which nobody, my wife, my dad, nobody that was around me, like, man, you waste a lot of time on your phone or on the computer. And it was really just working, trying to earn people's trust, trying to be out on Facebook as much as possible, trying to share my experience, my knowledge with people, to just get, earn their trust. And it was just a lot of work through that avenue.
I can definitely kind of relate to that. Just some of the stuff that, us trying to grow our own brand as well. Just like you said, kind of getting behind that keyboard and reaching out to guys like you to get you on the podcast or, collaborate and things with you build up that courage to just go after it and just do it.
Yeah.
And,
that's really the growth. And then you team up with the right people, the right companies. I hate the whole field staff model, the whole ambassador model. But it was part of the game. And I was always, it kind of comes back to that quote I said earlier, like, what would Grandpa think? I never kind of sold my soul though either along the way. Like, I knew I had to make some conscious decisions to work with some companies, whether it started at field staff and whether it ultimately went to bigger, relationships after that. But I was very careful not to kind of sell my soul within the hunting industry just for a 40% discount, which I think is very important, and where you can lose a lot of credibility along the way is, kind of doing what all these companies want you to do and looking like a paid poster at some point, isn't good for you.
What are some goals that you have for Phelps game calls? Where do you want the business to grow to?
So my passion, as far as like where we're going next, my passion is definitely in the elk hunting world. I've always been a well-rounded turkey caller as well. Loved turkey calling when I had more time. Now it seems like we're stuck in this elk call rut and I can't get out of it. We're building elk calls year round to keep up. But I think it's only obvious when you look at, as far as a call company, there's only 700 to 800,000 elk hunters in the world, which is still a big number. Like if you can get 10 to 20% of that business, like you're still, you're selling to a lot of people. But what's crazy is when you look at the amount of turkey callers or hunters out there, it's over 3.5 million. And so just on those numbers alone, like I'm missing a big chunk of call sales just because we don't market a ton to the turkey hunters. Ranella and the Meat Eater team has did a great job helping us market our turkey calls. We work with them closely. But I think that's really where we're going to start to work on and double down. We've got some boxes and pots and a new line of diaphragms coming out. We've got the Chris Paris signature in our lineup now. So Chris designed 3 calls and we've added those. And so we're going to try to grow on that turkey call side. And then I've also got designs ready for predator and deer calls as well. So it's really just refining those and moving forward on that. I've tinkered around with e-collars a little bit, kind of played with some designs and ideas on that. And then all the way through game camp and stuff. Like my mind never really has the opportunity to turn off, but it's just, trying to bring all of these ideas to reality probably isn't going to happen from a financial standpoint. So it's really just trying to, figure out what's next and where we're going. But I can definitely tell you turkey's probably next on the agenda as far as, filling out that whole turkey call line.
I know we'll be looking forward to seeing that because
I'm pretty excited about hearing that.
Yeah, I used to back when we were smaller, 10 years ago, back when I was doing all the lathe work by hand. Like we built a lot of pop calls, we built some boxes and stuff. It's just one off. So I've got the design, similar to the elk call side. Like I've tinkered with them enough. I know what matters. I've been so overwhelmed on the elk call side. I haven't got a chance to get back to it. And so I'm definitely going to cut out some time and try to do that.
Yeah, we're going to be stoked to see what you got coming down the pipe for turkeys, because I know it's this way in a lot of places around the country, but springtime is turkeys and how we stay sharp down here in Texas. So can't wait to see what comes from that.
Yeah, it'll be good.
What's the biggest mistake that you see? And I say mistake. What's something that you see beginners struggle with the most?
So there's 2 things. Number one, we have to make sure that this call seals off. So even more so than like a turkey call that you guys sound like you're maybe a little more familiar with, like turkey calling, you don't have to have the perfect seal like you do for elk calling. You're throwing the air more up at the call in the turkey call, where on an elk call, you're trying to slide the air past it, if that makes any sense. And so a lot of new callers will put this call in and they go right to trying to make a cow call, but they can't seal off the air. And so they're never going to get a clean sound. They're never going to get enough air across to get the volume out that you need. And so really number one is getting a seal. And so while we don't recommend you take a scissor and cut it right down to the frame, we do recommend that if you can't get a good seal, let's start taking the width in on that diaphragm frame tape and seeing if you can get it to seal. If the tape's up under your teeth, if the tape's having to fold down too sharply and you're not getting a good seal, take some off of the width first, and then maybe a little bit more off the width, and maybe a little bit on the back, and slowly whittle that call down so it seals right. That'd be my first recommendation. Number 2, I highly recommend that you don't try sounding exactly like a cow elk or a bull right off the bat. I think you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and you may throw the call down faster than you need to. We have some good YouTube videos, Dirk and myself. I always say try to sound like that European ambulance, the up and down, and that's really just walking that call through the high notes and all of the tones. Go high to low, high to low, high to low, and just work the call and figure out how to make those different sounds in your mouth. I know Dirk teaches sound like a high-pitched mosquito, which is a start to your cow call. So if you can hold that really high pitch, yeah, and if you can hold that on the cow call, then you should be able to drop your jaw and get that cow call to break over. So those are my two recommendations. Don't try to sound like a real cow right off the bat. So I guess that's from a user standpoint, and then from a call standpoint, make sure the call fits and seals off. And if it doesn't, we might need to try some different calls or different frame sizes. But we need to get that call to seal before you really ever can get a good sound out of it, especially on the elk call.
I'm sitting here thinking about, the first time I put a diaphragm in my mouth and, was trying to do the a cow call, and kind of like you said, you're trying to get the air past it, and I always kept it, never failed. Like I would always cut myself short. I couldn't get the call to sustain. Like I would get a sound and then I would stop it as soon as I started it. So what would you say is your single best piece of advice for a new elk hunter, whether it's calling related, just anything with your experience in elk hunting that you've gone throughout the years? If you could give anybody starting out one piece of advice, what would it be?
And it's tough. I know, I was in a point where I could only hunt the weekends or, very limited time, but it truly is time spent. And this isn't to take away from myself or anybody else's teachings. Like you can read books, you can, go through the Elk Collective, go through all of this learning, go to seminars. There's no replacement for just time in the woods, because that's where you build your confidence. That's where you get your real life experience and start to kind of put together your own game plan for elk hunting. I do it a certain way. Dirk and me hunt very, very similar, which works for us, but it might not work for the next guy. There's very successful elk hunters out there that don't bugle to bulls like we do. They may cow call everything in. And so while we can give good recommendations and good advice on how we hunt, time spent with bugling elk is the best teacher, just like, time spent with gobbling turkeys is your best teacher for turkey hunting. Yeah, you can read books all day. And so it's just to spend as much time out there as you can. Now I'm going to kind of follow that up with number two, and it's not necessarily easy to make happen or easy to find somebody, but if you can find a good mentor in any type of hunting, whether it's, spot and stock mule deer or, tree stand whitetails or turkeys in the mountains or elk in New Mexico flats, whatever it may be, whatever type of hunting you want to do, if you can spend a day or two with a very successful hunter and the method that you want to use, that will potentially cut down and make you more successful than anything you're ever going to do on your own for the next 20 years. And it's crazy to think, but just by figuring out where they park, what their mentality, what their thought process is, what they do, can really open up and kind of set you on the right path as a new hunter, versus if you're just kind of left to the wolves and can't figure it out on your own or put together a good game plan very quickly, you're going to fail more times than not. So I know it's tough. A lot of skilled hunters don't want to waste their time, helping a new hunter out. But if you can find somebody that's willing to do that, it's going to cut your learning curve down tremendously.
Man, I love hearing you say that. That's kind of what we're like, our whole premise, our whole idea, what we're trying to get people to do is just get out there and do it and learn it. We don't, with all of this, we've never claimed to be and will never claim to be subject matter experts. But we just want to get people out there. We want to help them learn along the way, learn from us and seeing us, even if it's just encouraging them to get out there and do it themselves. So that's to hear that is pretty awesome from somebody who's as well known and who's been doing it as long as you have. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's tough to make happen, but that mentor thing is huge. And I don't like to talk bad about anybody, but I'm fortunate to get to do a lot of seminars in the Washington, Oregon area here in my home my home area, and you get to hear the same guys that show up at your seminars year after year, and they can't figure it out. And I'm giving them all the tools that they need, but I think what they really need is somebody just to show them on the ground, and it would all click, because the passion's definitely there. The thirst to learn and be successful is there. I just think these people go out and they just can't make the right decisions, or they get, they make the wrong decisions potentially. And if you could get that mentor to just kind of push them through some of these decisions, it would potentially click, and those guys would, take off running. But mentor and then just time.
So speaking of time, I know we're getting towards the end of ours. If you don't mind, I've got one quick question. Some people might say this is controversial. Some people may not. It's standard practice for some, and others, others think it's the wrong thing to do. But we got to ask, do you night bugle?
So I've been very fortunate. I would definitely, I'm definitely a big fan of night bugling. I've been very fortunate that I haven't had to lately. We've either been able to get into the elk in the morning or the night, and I feel that night bugling may potentially screw it up. What I've been doing more so than that is hanging out in my area for an extra half hour, or getting there a half hour early and just letting the bulls bugle on their own. But if you're just in an area that you're flat struggling, definitely stay out, take a midday nap and night bugle, just because it's going to get you on elk, sooner than later. I preach it, but then when I look back, I haven't did it a whole bunch lately, just because I haven't had to. But there were times where night bugling was the only way, to find an elk. And I used an example on the 2011 bull that I killed. We got a response from a bull the night before. Just one bull answered, and it wouldn't answer a location bugle, it only answered the gnarliest challenge bugle that I could throw out. So we knew there were elk in there, and he sounded good. So we went back the next night, and the entire canyon was silent. I'm like, what is going on? Ended up calling in a small 4-point bull, silent, and Roosevelt ended up shooting him and killing him. He died in a patch of jack firs, which for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's around here we have a bunch of industrial logging, and so it was a piece that they had logged about 15 years ago, and the trees had been replanted, so they're basically immature trees that are very impenetrable. But anyways, I was sitting in this jack fir patch with my bull. I sent my buddy back we had some help coming in with bike carts and stuff. We were on an old walk-in road. I was sitting there in the same canyon that we had been hunting for 2 days straight, bugling into, heard no bugles besides the one. All of a sudden, as it got dark, the canyon started to light up. And I think by the time I was done, I had heard somewhere around like 13 different bulls bugle in that canyon. And I could not get a peep out of those things during the day at any time. And so that's just kind of like my testament to, if I would have went back there and bugled in the dark, at least I would have known that canyon was packed full of bulls. But if you went there in the daytime and there weren't elk out in the clear cut, you would never ever believe that there were elk anywhere in that drainage. So that's my best example I can give over of night bugling and why it can be very, very effective.
That definitely sounds like another notch in the yes to night bugling column.
Yeah, I haven't did it for probably the last time I did it was in 2018. I showed up late to a new unit that we were hunting in Idaho, and I did the extremely lazy night bugling. Literally just drove my truck up and down the road, turned it off, let it sit for 5 minutes and bugled. Then I located 3 or 4 different bulls that way, and it kind of saved the hunt for us because we weren't finding stuff in the daytime, and we probably would have moved areas if we hadn't known that there were definitely bulls there.
Jason, we just want to say thank you immensely for taking the time out to come and talk to us, and just tell us more about you, your calls, what your company's about, and just sharing your wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And there you have it, everybody. Mr. Jason Phelps from Phelps Game Calls hopped on with us, talked elk hunting tips and tactics, talked business, how he got his business started. And so we hope you all really enjoyed this one. If you like what you're hearing, you want to hear more, hit that like, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate your support, and we'll see you guys next time.